Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 91. Follow the Yellow Leaf Road. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the television series, Agatha All Along. How you doing today, Mike?
I am medium well. How are you?
Like a good steak.
Yeah.
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
Let's see. I am still waiting feedback from my editor on Zara 2. In the meantime, I've been doing some brainstorming for the third book. And what else? I know there's something else, but it's not coming to mind. Kindle Vella is now done. Amazon is shutting that down.
Yes, it is.
In the process. So no more Kindle Vella for me.
That makes sense to me because one of the things, I put the first book in the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard onto Kindle Vella as sort of like you were doing with your Zara, as sort of like almost like a beta version for people who were interested in wanting to read the story while I was crafting the rest of the series. It was available, it was there. And one of the drawbacks that I kind of always struggled with Kindle Vella, and actually kind of felt bad encouraging my readers to go there, was that it would cost more to pay for the episodes the way Amazon had it structured than it would to be to buy the book when I finally publish it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you structured the story, like how long the story was and how many words per episode. But yeah, I think that was fairly common. I don't remember. Mine was very similar for my first two, probably to what like the ebook price would have been for people. So it wasn't too far off. But yeah, I think it was probably a little more. Like if you went through the whole book there. And I'm like you, I used the platform sort of as a beta for my stories. I put it up. I edited before I put it up there, but it didn't go
Sure,
through.
Yeah, I did too. I tried to make it as good as possible.
I didn't go through a final round of edits, and I also had some, additional feedback. So the story changed a bit from there. Like my story, The Deep Dark, which is sort of a sci-fi action adventure horror kind of thriller thing. The version that's up there is really the alpha. I didn't even do a pass with other people.
Yeah.
I just did the draft and threw it up just to put it up somewhere. But so those may not have been the best story for the platform. It was intended to be more episodic, where you're just kind of reading a little, like little segment each time as you go, with stories that may or may not actually ever have an ending. Some people just write, 1,000 episodes, and the story just is ongoing. So maybe it wasn't the best platform for me or for you, I think for a lot of other people. And it struggled to gain traction and get off the ground. I think their interface needed a lot of work. They never opened it up for an international audience, so that kind of limited where they could go with it. And I think, a lot of episodic readers were already on other platforms, so it was difficult for Amazon to pull people over to it. And I think, like you said originally, I think the cost maybe was a little bit prohibitive as well. But anyway, so my stories are still up there for now. I'll be taking them down, in December probably.
Will you be putting The Deep Dark someplace else?
I don't know. I've been thinking about that. I know some people and some groups that I'm on are looking at other platforms to move their stories. I'd have to look at the terms. It's not really on my radar right now. I'm just focused on the Tales of Zara series. I
Right.
want to kind
Yeah.
of get that done. Yeah, because the Deep Dark is kind of on the back burner right now. I haven't even done a beta pass on that yet. I may look at other things. I looked at something else before. One thing I would like, and that Kindle Vella I felt didn't do well at, was a platform that allows people to find your stories easier, like to let you search for things and promotes them. Like here are stories that have 6 new episodes, things like that every so often. With Kindle Vella, it was like
Yeah.
here are the most popular stories, and like it just remains the same stories because they're always the ones
Yes.
listed. So
Yeah.
it's kind
I
of,
noticed that too. It was hard to
or they
feel like you were getting
concede.
any traction.
Yeah, yeah. Unless you were doing
Yeah.
advertising, and then you're spending more money than you're bringing in by far, most
Yeah.
likely. So, yeah, it wasn't the best. So, if I go to another platform, it would be something where there's more opportunity for people to search and find your stuff, or if you're updating episodes or segments of stories, it lets people know that a little bit better. Something like that.
Yeah. Would you consider, for example, putting the Deep Dark into your newsletter and allowing people to see it in its raw form there, or on Patreon, for example, as I do with the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard?
I think mine is already up on my Patreon account.
Oh, good. There you go.
Maybe I don't remember. I think so. I have it on Ream, which I'm not sure if I'm going to stay with Ream or not. Too many things to keep track of at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Sometimes it's
Patreon
just
Patreon is
really
just more
important to
known.
simplify. Yeah.
Yeah. As far as putting in my newsletter, probably not, just because it's so different from the story that people signed up for my newsletter with. Zara is a lower young adult, upper middle grade level story, and Deep Dark is very much not that.
That's
So
good thought. Yeah.
it's probably
That's
not.
very thoughtful. Yeah.
I wouldn't want to put it in their faces like, hey, here's this other story that's completely different. So if they like my writing style, they might like it anyway, but it's definitely a
Right.
different sensibility. So I'd probably keep that as something that's like, if you're interested in this kind of story, go seek it out.
As a reminder to our listeners, if you're interested in reading The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard, as it's being written, it's available on Patreon, on my Patreon. And even though Mike is going to pull the Tales of Zara off of Kindle Vella, the first book is still available on Amazon in ebook and paperback, and the paperbacks are available through other book retailers throughout the country. So there are a variety of different ways that you can access these works, and those links are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Ooh, let's see. Well, I finished the story I think I mentioned last time called Ghost Riders in the Sky. Timothy's on
Yes.
short. I don't know if it's a short story or a short novella, maybe.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Cool sci-fi. I always like his writing. So I finished that. And what else? I haven't been watching anything other than what we've talked about in terms of fantasy or sci-fi. I've been rewatching Arrested Development as kind of a palate cleanser, which is a
Okay.
comedy show. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a goofy comedy show. It's fun. So I've just been watching that again. Yeah, that's about it as far as stories over here. What about you? Have you seen anything cool in the sci-fi or fantasy realm?
The only thing that I've been doing, which is sort of kind of sci-fi and fantasy, is watching old episodes of Ghost Hunters on Disney Plus.
Oh my gosh,
Which
that's funny.
I know. We decided to start watching that around Halloween, and I'm still watching it because it's so fascinating to me how the assumptions that are made as far as the editing and the conclusions that are being drawn. And, I'm always sort of muttering under my breath, where's the control? Right?
Right.
They're treating this as sort of a scientific process, and you're not seeing this sort of the control. Like, where's the data logger being left in the house that hasn't had any paranormal activity to see what happens there? And it cracks me up because they're always going, did you hear that? And I can't hear squat. Now, I'm not there, and my hearing isn't as great as it used to be, so maybe I'm missing something.
No, I heard an
But
interview from someone who worked on, I don't know if it was that show or a show like that, and she was like, "Yeah, I was like totally believing this, and it's like I went on the show to investigate this stuff, and it was the same thing. She's like, people are like, did you see that? Did you hear that? And she's like, and they're just making stuff up. There was like nothing there ever. She's like, it was all just them doing it for the show, and she's like, it was so like such disillusionment.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not saying that that's what's happening. I'm just saying that it's very hard as an outside observer to validate the data that they are collecting, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, you're looking at it from a scientific standpoint.
Right. So it's just funny. I think it's just sort of funny. And of course, it's entertaining because we keep watching it. So there's something entertaining about it. What do I like about it? The possibility, I guess. There's always the possibility. I guess that's why I enjoy it. And probably why other people do too. Because I'm sure other people look at that and go, yeah, I didn't hear anything either. Or, and sometimes, they're like in some haunted mansion in the South and they're like, did you hear that? And I'm like, yeah, have you ever heard of humidity and expanding and contracting wood?
Yeah.
There's a lot of noises in old places in the South.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noises in old places. I think that's what's enjoyable about it is the possibility.
Well, yeah, and I think probably other people watching too. I don't think I've ever seen a full episode of it, but people probably have the same feeling like, oh, what did they hear? Like I didn't hear it, but they must have heard something, right? Or they saw something, they felt something, right?
Yeah.
Like what is it that they're feeling? What is it they're hearing? It's sort of this mystery.
Speaking of possibilities, are you ready to talk about Agatha?
Let's go.
Today we're talking about the story told in the television series Agatha All Along, and I'm going to read the short description of the series that you can find on Wikipedia. 3 years after being trapped under a magical spell in the town of Westview, New Jersey, at the end of the miniseries WandaVision, the witch Agatha Harkness escapes with the help of a teen who wishes to face the trials of the legendary Witch's Road. Without her magical powers, Agatha and the team form a new coven of witches to face the trials, while contending with some of Agatha's old enemies, such as the Salem Seven. Did you like this television series?
Yeah, overall I liked it. I like how it picks up off of WandaVision. I thought that was very cool. I was wondering where it was going at the start, like in the first episode. I'm like, is this a totally different thing? And then I realized, oh wait, she's still stuck in this other illusion. And then when she got kicked out of that was fun. So I like how they set it up. I like how they give us the transition from the previous series into this, and I thought that was fun. Her acting from like the first episode, you're like, this is weird. Like the way that she's acting, and all the people is kind of like over the top, and there's a little strange, and then you realize what's happening, and you're, okay, I get it. And then once they get going, I love the puzzly nature of the Witch's Road, where they each kind of have to figure out something that's relevant to their particular skill set, or overcome something that they've dealt with in their past, or they failed to deal with in their past. But yeah, I like that. I like the puzzle aspect of the story. That's something I use a lot in my Tales of Zara books. Sort of puzzle elements are kind of embedded into the story. So that's one of the promises of my books to my readers. So it's like it's something I have to keep in mind as I move on to book 3 and 4, not to lose that because that's important. So I definitely appreciated that here. Those are fun things. I like that when the characters are presented with just, here's a little self-contained thing you got to figure out. Go for it. I like that. And I think the show makes a great use of foreshadowing throughout it. Some of it's kind of apparent as you're watching it, but a lot of it is just, you're going along with the story, not really thinking about it. And then later when things are revealed, you're like, oh, that's why that was that way, or that's how that was set up. So I think they did that really well. And I thought overall, the characters were very interesting. I like how each of the witches had their own specialty and each had their own wound from their past that they had to deal with. I liked how one of the witches, Rio, she was like, I think if she was the Green Witch, as she said, which I thought was funny, and ultimately revealed to be, the character of Death. I liked that. I liked how they set that up, and it was very different than how you usually see that character represented. Mostly, though, I liked the series of reveals at the end. I thought the show really came together in the last 3-4 episodes as you start realizing what's really going on. the fact. Obviously, there's spoilers. We're talking about the end of the story, so if you haven't seen it, well, we're going to be spoiling it potentially here. How Billy had conjured the witch's road. I thought that was very cool. I wasn't expecting that. I knew something was weird, but I wasn't expecting that. And then I really loved how the road was just a made-up song by Agatha and her son. That was fantastic. I thought that was great. Centuries ago, right? It's like it had become this song that they sort of passed around, and then other witches kind of latched onto it, and it was all to their detriment. And it had taken on this legendary status to the point where a witch even did, a released ballad for it. I thought that was really clever. And overall, I thought the show was, in the beginning, it wasn't as good for me, although it was definitely cool and interesting enough to keep my attention. And then it just grew as the series went, and the last few episodes I thought were really good. And I think based on previous chats we've had, you probably liked this show even more than me from the beginning, because it sounded like you got hooked really, really quick. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what your overall thoughts are and what in particular you liked about this show.
Well, overall, I really enjoyed the show. I actually kind of struggled a little bit with the end. So we can talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Okay, cool.
I was, yes, drawn in immediately by the show. I loved and I think what really did it for me was the immersiveness there were so many details, the immersiveness of the details of the story. They put so much time and effort in everything. Oh, what was it? There was a line in the very first episode that was from The Wizard of Oz, right? Which is follow the yellow brick road.
Yeah.
So it was like all of this stuff that was woven in. Oh, right. She's most sincerely dead, I think was the line, which is the line from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And they just put so much attention to the details. It was incredibly immersive. And I love that kind of stuff, like on an Easter egg hunt, having fun with it. And I know there's more that I don't know that I'm also excited to learn about. So I really enjoyed that. I also loved how incredibly well developed all these characters were from the very start. There's something going on between Agatha in her role as the detective and this FBI agent named Rio from the very beginning. And Rio, you can see she is outside of whatever's going on with Agatha.
Yeah.
And you could see it right away. And that makes you wonder, okay, what's going on? What's this? The little breadcrumbs that were laid from the very beginning were so cool that I just wanted to keep going. Rio was clearly a deep character with history with Agatha. And then who was this teen? What was very strange to go along with this teen who all of a sudden showed up, and what was the story with him, and what was this thing that was going on with his mouth when he tried to tell his name? So every single breadcrumb that was laid made me want to go further and further. And as they brought the other witches into form, the coven, each one of them had, and they kind of did some exposition on this. So that was helpful, but it wasn't in a way that I felt like I was being beat over the head with exposition. We knew what each one of these characters' issue was right away.
Yeah.
Agatha went to find them and said, okay, I see what your problem is. You can fix it on the road. I see what your problem is. You can fix it on the road. And so they came already to the story and to this journey with their needs clearly laid out. And the only one we didn't really understand her need was Agatha. Yeah, she needed her purple back. She needed her powers back, but she also needed something else. You could see that. And so that was then uncovered very slowly as well. So there was lots of wonderful details and mystery. It really reminded me a lot of Wednesday in that regard, with just the immersiveness of the storytelling and the details and the mystery that was being laid out so that we kept following to see what was going to happen next. We can talk about what I wasn't that crazy about, but I'm going to say that, again, spoilers. I'm going to put spoilers in big all caps at the beginning of the description so people know that there's going to be spoilers in this story. But the episode Death's Hand and Mine, which was focused on Lilia, it was a masterpiece. It was the best episode of the entire series.
Yeah,
I thought it was a masterpiece. Even my spouse said when it ended, that was beautiful, which there's not usually that much enthusiasm. And it was incredibly powerful. I thought it was a beautifully done episode. Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. Would I watch it again? Yes.
Yeah, and I would as well. I kind of I'm hoping they do a season 2.
They're
Um,
not going to.
oh, they're not going to. That stinks.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it would have been fun.
They are going to do something else. Clearly, they've set this up
Yeah, to
where,
like blend in with the MCU somehow.
yeah. So with the teen who we now know is named Billy, Billy and Agatha going off, Agatha essentially is his spirit familiar. So, anyway, let's talk
Okay.
about what we might have changed as a writer. And I'm going to emphasize here that, again, I really enjoyed this series. And so for me, what I wasn't crazy about are very much personal preferences.
Okay.
So go
All
ahead.
right.
Let's
Yeah,
see what you might have changed.
there's a number of things for me. I guess my list is mostly things that I felt weren't clear or weren't explained. And I wanted either an explanation or a clear explanation for them. Okay, for example, who were the Salem 7? Was that supposed to be something I remembered from WandaVision? Because I don't
Yeah.
remember anything about that.
Yeah, you're right. That was a very subtly explained thing. They were the daughters of the witches that Agatha killed in a flashback during WandaVision. And I think one of them was her own mother. So she was being tied to a stake, and these witches were like, "You brought this on yourself." And then they threw their power at them, and then she killed them by absorbing their power. And then so the Salem 7 were the daughters of those witches. But you're right, that was only mentioned like once or twice in the entire series.
Okay, yeah, I
It
didn't
was
pick
easy.
up that
Yes.
at all.
Yeah, easy.
I figured it was some witches she had killed in the past or wronged, but then it was like, why not the other one? Like, seems like she'd killed hundreds of them potentially. So,
Yeah.
what was so bad about these particular 7? I didn't really get. So I would have liked a little bit more motivation for those 7 in particular. But if they're the daughters of witches that were killed, I guess that makes some sense. Although they seemed like completely supernatural beings. Were they still alive, or were they
Yeah.
dead and resurrected? I didn't really get who they were. So
Yeah.
I would have liked
So, yeah.
something more about that, given that like it was the motivation for pushing them forward. So that was one thing. The Mrs. Hart character felt a bit like a throwaway character. It's like she was there and then kind of for comic relief, and then she's the first one out. Like, okay, we've dispensed with her. Let's move on to the real story. So that felt a little weird. It didn't seem like she really even needed to be there. I'm not sure what they were going for there, but I missed it, whatever it was. And then for me, I have larger questions about the end. So when Agatha is faced with either sacrificing herself or sacrificing Billy to death at the end, and she chooses to sacrifice herself, that seemed way too quick, and I didn't really get why, certainly in that moment. And even after the fact, it was kind of like, oh, she was taking a gamble. But what was that gamble? Like, what was she hoping to get out of that? I didn't. It was either not explained or I didn't get it. So I would have liked that explanation to be clearer. I was hoping for this, and it didn't work out. Oh well, I guess I'm a ghost now. Something, because it just her snap decision. At least that's how it came across. Didn't make sense to me. I didn't believe it in that moment. On the other side of that equation, death. Why would Death let Billy go just because Agatha finally sacrificed herself? She had already stated earlier in the series that Billy was this aberration, this thing that was upsetting the sacred order of things. So why would she just let him continue to be there? Just because? And now it's even worse because his brother presumably is out loose too. So that didn't make sense to me. I don't understand why. I get from a writing perspective why that was an interesting choice for Agatha potentially in that moment. But for Death, it seemed like it's no choice. It's like, well, I'm just going to take both of you. Like, I don't get that. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure how to resolve that because I do like the setup for Agatha. But it doesn't make... I guess if they hadn't set it up earlier that Billy was such an aberration and upsetting this natural order, if they hadn't done that, then it would have been perfectly fine. It's like, okay, one of you's got to go because you're supposed to be dead already. Then that would have been fine. So maybe that's how they could have handled that. And again, knowing, like, I'm more concerned about these issues now that I know there's no season 2, because I was leaving season 2 as open, like maybe they could explain some of this stuff. So now that they're not, I find it a little bit more frustrating. And then also, I didn't get when they showed the scene, well, not the scene, the sequence, I guess, of Agatha with her son Nicholas, right? And we see them going from town to town, and she's taking out these witches. I don't understand why Nicholas just died at some point. It's like, oh, he's just dead. It seemed like, yeah, the way they set it up was Death says, I'm going to give you some time. That's all I can give you. Okay. I would have wanted either you've got 7 years with this kid, enjoy it, right? To make it specific. And then we see her trying to stave it off at the 7-year mark, or 6 years, whatever it was when he died. Or we see that Agatha was explicitly extending his life by absorbing power from the other witches, and make that clear, because it seemed like that's what they were trying to say, but it wasn't clear. So one of those two things I would have liked, because as it was kind of weird. It's like, oh, the kid's just dead now because we wanted him to die. So I would have wanted that clarified. I would have made that more specific one way or the other. And then even after that, I don't fully understand Agatha's motivation for stealing the power of the witches over the years. Like, why? Why did she do that? If they had made it explicitly like she was doing this to give more life to her son, and then when her son said, no, I don't want to do this anymore, he finally died. Okay, they kind of set it up that way, so that kind of makes sense. But if they had made that more explicit and more clear, then she kept on doing that afterward because she was angry at witches in general, or because she was addicted to the power. That kind of would have all made all of that make more sense. As it was like, she's just killing witches. Like, that's just the thing that she does now. So it just didn't wrap all together as nicely as it could have for me. But maybe I just missed something. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on my comments and what other things you would have improved.
First, I'm going to say you didn't miss anything, because I had the same problem. Second of all, I'm going to clarify that while you were doing your very good description of what bothered you, because they were very similar to the things that I would have liked to have been changed a little bit, I did find an article dated 2 days ago that it might be getting a season 2. This is from Forbes, and the author, Paul Tassi, is theorizing that because it was submitted to the Emmys as a comedy as opposed to the limited series category, that they might be considering having another season of it. Now, this is all just conjecture.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I guess if they get good viewership, that might give them more incentive.
Exactly. And it's because I think it was pretty good. So, yeah, anyway. So there we go. So maybe there will be a season 2 in which we can get these questions answered. But as it stands right now, there is no season 2 announced. So we're stuck with season 1, which means there are questions that were left unanswered that I agree with you. I think were difficult. And the two things that actually bothered me the most were, and you're not going to be surprised to hear this because I've said this before, as you're aware, I love ensemble stories. And I love it when, at the end, the ensemble comes together and each one of their individual characters with their individual strengths overcome their individual, whatever their challenges are, to solve the problem together. I love that kind of stuff. And we didn't get that here. And I was disappointed that all these great characters that were so well developed and so interesting were just all picked off one by one. I hated it. I really, and I was really hoping at the end that they would all come back. That would be what the gift of the road at the end. And it wasn't. And so I found that disappointing. And then, like you, I was disappointed with how the stories sort of wrapped up in the same way that you were. There are things that didn't make sense that I think could have worked better. And more to the point, this series was called Agatha All Along, which means that theoretically, the main character of the story is Agatha, and which means I would like to see some kind of character arc with Agatha. And there really wasn't one. At least not that I can identify.
I was thinking too. It seems like the show really should be called Billy All Along.
Yeah,
rather than Agatha All Along.
Exactly. I would have loved it if when she sacrificed herself to death for Billy, that it came out of some lesson learned. Sort of, kind of, maybe a little bit might have been interpreted as that, but it was not clear. And
Right.
honestly, they had this backstory episode about her life and about losing her son Nicholas. I think that should have been the second to last episode. If they had put that in as the second to last episode, and then had the last episode where she sacrificed for Billy, then we could have better inferred a character arc, that she learned something from her journey on the road with Billy that enabled her to sacrifice herself for Billy. That was kind of what I was
maybe
thinking.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even then,
I
it's
agree.
like in that moment, I couldn't tell if she was, like you were saying, making, having this character revelation and having a change, or if she was being calculating. It just wasn't clear.
It wasn't clear. And like you, I was very confused by, why is she always attacking these witches? It wasn't clear to me that she was giving her power to keep Nicholas alive.
No.
That wasn't made clear to me either. It just seemed to be the
I was
thing
just kind of guessing that maybe that's what it was, but it definitely wasn't clear, and it didn't seem to really make much sense, because it's like, okay,
yeah,
like how long does it prop him up for? Because obviously they have to travel between towns. If they had made that the storyline, I think that would have worked a lot better for me if they had just made it like, oh, he's about to die, and then she makes a deal with death. It's like, okay, in exchange for these other lives, I'll keep him alive longer. Something like that.
Right, but Death's going to capture those lives anyway. So to me, that I don't think Death would have made that deal. To me, what I was thinking is that, and maybe this is too cliche, which I get. I get that it's too cliche, but sometimes cliches are satisfying. That's why they keep hanging around. Yeah. If she and Nicholas, had created this song to entertain people, and this is how they lived, and then when he died, she was so grief-stricken that's when she started killing the witches. Because every time they asked for that song, it reminded her of her son who was gone, and she was angry at that, and she was angry at, blah, blah, blah. That would have made more sense to me as far as the character arc, because then getting some kind of a resolution to that grief through Billy would have brought it to full circle. They created, she and Nicholas created the song, they used it to live, then he died, so she pretended that song actually meant something, and she used it to kill witches. Then Billy creates the road. She and her son created the song, but now Billy created the road and brings her full circle so that she can let all that go. Cliche, maybe, but to me, I personally might have found that a little bit more satisfying.
Yeah, I think that could have worked. I think we could have seen, like you said, if there was some clear growth from her, right? If this is supposed to be her story, at least clarifying that would have made sense. And I wanted his death to have some reason. It just felt so out of the blue. Like,
yeah,
if it had been something that she did or didn't do that specifically led to him dying, it would have made more sense. Because it's like, oh, he just, he got sick and he died. Okay. Like,
yeah, I mean, I was okay with that because, I was okay with that because, she says when she's with Billy, sometimes boys just die.
Yeah.
That kind of set that up for the understanding of what happened to Nicholas. I was okay with that, but I understand what you're saying. A little bit more of some connecting tissue, either a dialogue or something in the storyline would have helped it make more sense. I agree. So did you identify any themes in Agatha All Along?
Yeah, this was a little tricky because of what you said. I wasn't clear on her growth, but if I look at some of the other characters and kind of where it seemed like they were going with her, what I came up with was, despite the pain of grief, you must learn to accept that death is a natural facet of life.
I like it.
What do you got?
I got face your fears. For me, each one of these characters was afraid of something. Their going on the road was about facing their fears. Even Agatha, who was afraid to face Nicholas. That's what she said. That's why she wouldn't go to the other side. Which is interesting because you wonder why. Is it because she kept him alive and he suffered with his illness? Or was it because of all the people she killed to keep him alive, as you theorize? We never got a clarification on that. But I think each one of these people, including Team/Billy, who was afraid because he didn't know who he was. Jen was afraid because her powers were taken. Alice was afraid because she had this curse on her. Lilia was afraid because she could see the future and she could see when people died, and she didn't like that. And even Mrs. Davis, is that her name?
I think
Who's that?
so. That sounds right.
She was still afraid from Wanda. She showed fear about Wanda, what had happened with
Yeah.
Wanda. So, I mean, each one of them had fear. I would say the only one who didn't seem to demonstrate any fear was Rio.
Yeah, Rio doesn't have much to fear, I guess.
But she was afraid of the imbalance created by, Billy's
Yeah.
survival. So, I think that's what to me the message of the road was: face your fears.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense. What would you say Billy's fear was?
Not knowing who he was.
Yeah, not having that certainty.
Yeah,
He came to realize that at the end, though, right? So
yeah,
he had to accept
because
it.
he lost William's life and gained Billy's life, but in that body. I think there was a lot of fear going on there.
I think regarding why Agatha was afraid to face her son. I mean, that's a good question, because I was wondering that too. Like, why you would think she would want to be reunited with her son. The only thing I could figure, based on what they showed us, is he didn't want her to keep killing witches, right? But then that becomes her thing. That's all she does after that, as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
Her whole shtick is luring witches in with the song that they created and taking them out. So maybe she's afraid to face him because of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Maybe she's ashamed. Maybe we'll find out in a season 2.
Yeah.
So as a writer, what do you take away from Agatha All Along?
My favorite thing, the thing that I take away, is I like the idea of recontextualizing what has come before so that you see it in a new light later.
Yeah.
We see that in the nature of the Witch's Road, and then again in like how the song was created by Agatha and her son and ultimately used against the witches. I thought that was really cool. I like that a lot. So I would like to do things. I try to do things like that in my story so that when you get to the end, it's like, oh, this is what that meant. So I try to do some of that, and I really like that. I think they did that well.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that too. And I would only add to that, again, what we've talked about before, the immersiveness and the mystery that really just keeps going. So fabulously done.
Cool. Yeah, I agree too.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Agatha All Along. As a reminder, the Stories Told podcast will be going on hiatus for a couple of weeks at the end of November. So if you don't see a couple of uploads from us for a while, fret not. We will be back after that hiatus is concluded. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie Interstellar. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.